Hey Coder, so in this video I'm going to walk you through finding triangular arbitrage opportunities on the Binance exchange, and of course you can code this up to work for any exchange you want, but this is for the Binance exchange using the Bellman Ford algorithm. So if I go down here to source, you'll see here I have a whole Rust implementation of the Bellman Ford algorithm here to detect potential arbitrage opportunities. And I say potential because remember, once you take into account order book depth, then you need to do an updated calculation, which is what this whole code package does. It does all of that for you. And there's example code here, for example, with Binance actually doing all of those checks and balances for you. So if you're curious about arbitrage, especially triangular arbitrage, you're going to find this really, really helpful and saves you a lot of time because all the logic is here. So that's great, but you've already got the code package, so let's get going. Now you can see here I've gone and downloaded this into a folder called My Project. Remember, the GitHub link is up next to this video on the CodeRaiders website, so just grab that link, git clone the actual clone repository or the Git repository, and then call it whatever project you want to call it. I've called it My Project. I'm also using Rust, so you will need to make sure you have Rust installed as well. And if I just show you here, these are the versions of Rust that I'm using. You don't have to be using the same versions, but I recommend just making sure you've got these version numbers or later in order for this to work correctly on your machine. So make sure you've got Rust, and also make sure you've downloaded the package just like I've shown you I've got here, and called it whatever you want. I've called it My Project. So the first thing we're going to do is go over here to the configurations. And so let's go over here to the constants.rs. And this is where we're going to go and adjust all of the inputs for what we want this code to do. So we have two options here, Searcher and Listener. Searcher will take periodic snapshots of all the prices from the exchange, in this case Binance, and then run them through the graph, run them through the search using the Bellman Ford to see, hey, based on these high-level prices, are there any potential arbitrage trades? Once it identifies what those potentially are, it will go and pull the order books and then do a depth calculation to work out, okay, based on an amount I set, how much potential arbitrage actually is there. And by the time it finds that, then it can go and trade it, which brings me on to the next two items. You have these two items here, true and false. And don't worry, I'll get to listener in a minute. But if you have these two items here, true and false, the first one is whether I wanted to save the data or not to a CSV, i.e. for every arbitrage opportunity I find, do I want to save it to a CSV? This is very useful if you're doing research on an exchange, right? How many arbitrage opportunities is it detecting and when? So I'll show that to you in a moment. And then this false one here is, do I want it to trade? So if I set this to true, it will actually go and trade those opportunities. Now you need an API key for it to do that. So if you do want to trade, let me open up my terminal here. Then you need to create a .env file. So here I've typed touch.env, and you can also just right click and insert new file, .env. And in here, you will want to insert, you can grab it from the README if you want, your Binance API key and Binance secret. So that's where you'll put those over here. Now my Binance API key is over here, so I'm just going to copy it straight from Binance. So just go to API management if you don't know how to do that on Binance. But just grab your Binance API key here. And then your Binance API secret is over here. I'm not going to show that to you now. Also make sure that you restrict this to your IP only and enable spot trading if you want trading to be enabled, which I've got here. Now, just remember, this here is for education and research and for using into your own projects. This bot is not going to print money for you. It's going to make you no money. So please don't go and acquire this code package if you think this bot alone is just going to go and make you money. This bot is going to show you how to detect arbitrage opportunities. It's going to give you all the code for that, how to check their depth, and how to execute them if you find them, all using this Binance example. But Binance is like the most major crypto exchange there is. And with that said, there's a lot of competition. And so people are winning on arbitrage there by having co-located servers or by having large VIP accounts with tiny amounts of commissions that they have to pay. So please don't think that you're going to go and make a ton of money straight off the bat with this here. This is if the algorithm is valuable to you. That's what you want to use this for. Nonetheless, I'm going to go and put in my API secret now, and then I'll see you back here at the constants file. So that's us set up. So if I wanted to trade, I could set this to true, but I'm going to keep it as false for now. Now we also have the listener. So if I put in listener like this, you'll see that we can actually go and use a WebSocket. So we have a WebSocket implementation of this as well, where we are listening to specified prices that we specify over here. So whatever symbols you want the algorithm to search for arbitrage opportunities on, it will actually connect to a WebSocket with Binance and exchange information far, far quicker so that it can go and perform those checks far, far quicker. And this is quite an advanced implementation. I'll show it to you in a moment, but it connects to that WebSocket. It'll search for whether or not there's a potential arbitrage. And if it validates that there is one, if you have it set to trade, it will trade it. Otherwise, for example, here, if you have it set to store the arbitrage opportunity, it'll actually go and store that for you in a CSV file and just append it to an existing file if there's more than one. So that's what the listener here is actually doing, is it's using the WebSocket. But I actually just here now want to use the searcher, because with the searcher, I don't have to specify what tokens I wanted to look at or what assets. It will just look at all of them. It'll take a price dump of everything and search through all of them. And it'll do that, every, however often you set in arb detection. So you'll see that when you get to the code, but it'll do it here every half a second or second, whatever you want to set, and then identify those for you and trade them if you have it set to trade. Now, asset holdings. So this over here is just going to be what assets do you actually have in your Binance account, for example, in whatever exchange you're using, that you can actually trade from. So if I'm holding USDT, BTC, ETH, all of those, you can put those here. And then it will, if it finds an arbitrage opportunity and you have, tokens for that there, it will successfully try and actually trade that for you, or unsuccessfully if it becomes unprofitable and bad timing. So here we also have what fiat assets we want to exclude. So these are all of our fiat currencies here. And the reason I want to exclude those is because, for example, with Binance, if it exchanges something to euro, then the euro to whatever other coin might fail, because Binance might not allow you to do that automatically through the API. That's an issue I had. So I just excluded all the fiat currencies up here. This is where you set your USD equivalent budget. So even if it's trading from BTC, it'll work out, what is 25 USD's worth of BTC, and then it'll trade that amount of BTC. But I like to think in US dollar terms, so that's what this here will do. And then, different arbitrage opportunities have a different size. So you might have, 10 different legs to an arbitrage trade and not want to trade that because every single one of those is going to incur a commission fee. So you might want to say, okay, this needs to have a maximum of 3, which will be actually also the minimum you could set. So this will be a minimum of 3 because you can't have an arbitrage opportunity on one exchange with less than 3 trades. But 3, 4, 5, I think 5 is a decent number, so I've just set it to that. And so if there's more than 5 trades here, it won't bother analyzing that any further. And then here, the minimum percentage threshold you want to consider for an arbitrage opportunity here, for example, could be 1.5%. Just bear in mind that different trades are going to carry different commissions depending on different exchanges. So if you go and code this up for a different exchange, just bear in mind that you might need your threshold to be something different. So these values here, these are just set because they're basic values. They'll work for everyone out the box, but the chances are you're going to want to do something a lot more advanced, but this should get you set up from the get-go. Excellent. Now let's make sure this all builds. So we're going to go cargo build, and this will go and compile everything for us. And then once it's done, I'll show you how to actually build this to a binary file. Okay, great, that's done. So now let's go cargo build -- release, and this will build the binary file. Great, so now I can go down here to target, release, and here it is, Bellman Ford Pegasus. That's the name of this actual binary. That's what we named it here in the cargo.toml. So if you want it to be called something else, you could just change it over here. But that's now gone and built. So if you wanted to run this, you could, but don't run it yet because there's something we need to talk about. Remember, this is using the Binance exchange. If you're in a country like the US, which actually blocks the Binance exchange, or Binance will block you from being able to use the API, you could go, for example, and change the endpoints to say, instead of api.binance.com to api.binance.us. That's one thing you could do. And then you also need to just make sure and check the Binance US API documentation. So this is all the longer way around, but probably the correct one if you're actually planning on trading on Binance US. Or what you can also do if you're just testing and wanting to do calculations and get a CSV file working is you can use a VPN. So for example, instead of being in the United States, I could set this to United Kingdom and connect to that, and then it will connect to Binance because the exchange will think I'm in the UK. Now I can't recommend you do that, but this is for when I'm building things and testing things that are available in certain countries. This is how I get around it. So just bear that in mind as well. This is set up to work for Binance, not Binance US. So if you're in the US or in a country that doesn't communicate with Binance, then that's something you might have to bear in mind. So with all that said, let me clear the terminal and go cargo test. And when you do that, it will run all the tests to make sure this actually all works for you before you go and run anything. And you can see here it's detected negative cycles, meaning it's found arbitrage opportunities to dig into, and it's gone and pulled their order books to check the depth of them. Doesn't mean it's found any. We'll look at that in a minute. And it's pulled order books, etc. If that didn't work for you first time, just run it again. It could be that something lagged on the exchange call to Binance, but it should run, and it should run first time as well. If it hasn't worked for you, again, check, does your country allow access to the Binance exchange? So what we can do now is we can either just go cargo run, and it's going to now go and run what we built earlier. And so you can see here it's scanning for arbitrage, and it's now detected an arb rate of 0.997. That means it didn't find one. So what this means is it found one with a leg of 3. And when it actually got the depth of it, it turned out there's no arbitrage. And for the vast majority on Binance, there's going to be no arbitrage opportunities because, again, there's people that have a lot more size. They have much less commissions. They have, machines and algorithms running very close to the Binance exchange. If there's an arbitrage opportunity, they're going to detect it way before you'll probably detect it running this from home. At least that's my experience. Anyway, that's not to say it won't work on any exchange. It's just Binance is going to be the most competitive exchange out there. But if you see this, that's actually working. And so we can go here now to our constants, stop that from running, and change this to listener. And let's go and run this. So if I go cargo run, that'll now connect to the Binance WebSocket. And let's just make sure that connects. There we go. So it's now connected to the Binance WebSocket. And it's not going to do much unless it finds something. So occasionally it'll kick off because it's doing a lot of computation. So it'll kick you off of the WebSocket. But if that happens, it'll just reconnect again. So you might see some printouts if that does happen, that it just reconnects. And that can also be dependent on the internet connection and speed. But this is WebSockets. It can be a bit finicky working with WebSockets, at least in my experience. But nonetheless, that code is here so that if you do just want to listen to some prices and very, very quickly go and detect whether there's potential arbitrage with those prices, there is an algorithm written here for you to do that. So you've got your Bellman Ford algorithm, and also with unit tests for that, you've got your code for detecting arbitrage, meaning it knows what order books to pull, it knows how to assess the depth of that arbitrage, and also the code to then go and execute that arbitrage and place real trades. That's all over here working nicely and tested for you. Now, in terms of tracking these, you'll notice when we ran our test, it went and checked that it could actually store arbitrage opportunities. And here you can see, if you actually opened this up as a CSV, you would see your timestamp, the size of the arbitrage, and what assets were involved to go and trade that arbitrage over here. So that's all working perfectly. If you've got this far, congratulations. You have some seriously advanced code here, some very useful code, especially here with the Bellman Ford. Now, if you want to go and update this or use this for a different exchange, what I'd recommend to do is to really focus on 2 things. The traits. So if you add an exchange, you'll need to have these traits here, where you can get the symbols, get the prices, get the exchange rates, or calculate the exchange rates. And all of those are here for Binance. And then also to make actual API calls to that exchange, you'll need these functions. and then just make sure you can implement the Bellman Ford for that exchange. And if you want to know how I've done all of that, the example code is here for Binance, all written out for you. Again, if you're not a Rust fan, you could just copy this code, ask ChatGPT to convert it to Python for you, for example, and then you're going to have, this code working using Python or whatever programming language you want to. But I use Rust. I like Rust. It's super fast. So for example, if I wanted to test this, I could go cargo test, and then I could just punch that in here. It extracts the Binance order book, put dash dash space dash dash no capture if you wanted to print it out, and it'll go and run just that specific unit test for you. And so here's how you can build up your own code and plug into these algorithms. And then in terms of with the Bellman Ford, you'll notice here we have all of the code here with the full algorithm and implementation. So if I go down here to the test, I could test here, does it find a negative cycle? So I could go cargo test and dash 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 no capture. And yes, it will go and run this code and see, okay, did I find a potential arbitrage? Now this is using some foreign exchange rates as set up for testing, but it will go and do that for you. And in fact, it will go and detect multiple cycles for you as well. So I hope you find that very valuable and very useful, and congratulations, you've got to the end here, and I'll see you in the next one.